Tonight we are going to talk about LSAT's two most common flaws. The title in the syllabus is Flaw, Confusing, Sufficient, and Necessary. That is probably the LSAT's number one flaw in logical reasoning. But it's hard to talk about this subject without talking about the second most common flaw, which is confusing correlation with causation. Let me just start with an example. So if I said to you, if you drink the poison, then you're going to get sick. Okay? If you drink the poison, then you're going to get sick. That is called a conditional statement. It's an if-then statement, but it's called a conditional statement because there are two conditions in it. Right? The first condition is if you drink the poison. The second condition is then you will get sick. The LSAT and probably other places, but I only know about the LSAT. The LSAT calls that if clause, if you drink the poison, the sufficient condition. Okay? And they call the then clause, then you will get sick, the necessary condition. And the reason that they call it those two conditions that way is because that's actually what they are. If it's true that if you drink the poison, then you will get sick, drinking the poison is the sufficient condition. In other words, it is enough to guarantee that you will be sick. Now, you could argue with me, you could say, hey, look, I know people who have drunk poison and they never got sick. We're not talking about that. We're assuming that when we're given sentences like this on the LSAT that they are in fact true if they are presented as evidence, right? So if the LSAT says, if you drink poison, then you will get sick, you just have to nod your head and say, okay, got it. You know, we see this in the games all the time. They have if-then statements that are completely ludicrous. If Jones goes fourth, then Sarah has to go fifth. Why the hell does that have to be true? I have no idea, but it doesn't matter. The point is that when you see an if-then statement in logical reasoning and it's presented as evidence, you just have to assume that it's true. The if clause is the sufficient condition because it guarantees that the then clause will happen, right? The then clause, in this case getting sick, is called the necessary condition because it's what has to happen. It's necessary. If you run into me on the street for some odd reason, and you ask me some odd question like, have you ever been sick? And I said to you, no. And let's assume that's true. I've never ever been sick in my life. Could I have drunk this supposed poison? No, there's no way you could have drunk that poison because it was the sufficient condition. Drinking it guaranteed that I would get sick. So if I've never gotten sick in my life, there's no way I could have drunk that. That's the definition of something that's necessary. If getting sick is a necessary condition, if you don't have that condition, if that hasn't happened, then it's impossible for you to have done the sufficient condition. Right? That's why we're saying it's necessary. Okay? If that's all confusing, just remember this. The if clause is the sufficient condition, and the then clause is the necessary condition, because it's what has to happen. Okay, so if I drink the poison, then we know that I'm going to get sick. That's necessary. I think we're all comfortable with that, right? What made me sick? The reality is that we don't actually have any clue what's causing me to get sick. All we know is that if you drink that poison, hey, you're going to end up sick. Now, given our understanding of poison and our understanding of sickness, it's very normal to assume that the poison is causing the sickness, but let me give you another example that uses the exact same kind of logic. It has an if-then statement, and then I'm going to ask you what the cause is. So let's assume that you read on the LSAT that if I go outside, if Ben goes outside, it will be sunny. It will be sunny. Now, again, that's a ludicrous statement in the world, right? It's like, oh, I'm limited to going outside only when it's sunny. But if we read that on the LSAT and we say, okay, this is true. If Ben goes outside, then it's sunny. going outside is the sufficient condition. It guarantees that it will be sunny. So if I go outside, you know it has to be sunny. So if it's nighttime, if it's not sunny, then you know I haven't gone outside, right? Because as soon as I go outside, it's going to be sunny. Okay? So what causes it to be sunny? Are we suggesting by the fact that if I go outside, it's going to be sunny, that my going outside causes the sun to come up? No, most likely, I'm scared of the dark or something like that, right? So if I go outside, it absolutely has to be sunny because I cannot step outside if it's not. Something's, going on in my head that's a little off. But in any case, the point is that an if-then statement, even though it sounds like it's creating a causal relationship, it's not. Okay? It's just telling you if this thing happens, then we know this other thing is going to happen, but we don't know the how or the why. We can certainly speculate, but they're two different things. Are you guys okay with this? I know this runs counter to our intuitive understanding of the world. In fact, if you said, if you drink poison, then you will get sick, and you started going around saying, well, gee, I wonder why you get sick. Most people would think you're not really putting two and two together. So there is value in making assumptions about the world, but the LSAT is asking us to be very, very strict and say, if you don't know, then don't say you know, right? My point is that these are two different things. Now let's stay focused on if-then statements for a half second. If I say, if I drink the poison, then I'm going to get sick, can I conclude that if someone is sick, that they drank the poison? Nope, I hope we all instantly recognize, no, you cannot do that. If you do, and I know that's a simple example, but I just want you to get your mind wrapped around the verbiage here. If you do that, then what you've done is you've treated what is in fact a necessary condition. What was the necessary condition? It was getting sick, right? And you've treated that as if it were a sufficient condition. You said, aha, this person is sick, therefore I can conclude from that they must have drunk the poison. No, that is the LSAT's number one flaw. You were told if you drink the poison you're going to get sick, and you mistakenly conclude, oh, well, if they're sick, then they must have drunk the poison. That's confusing sufficient for necessary, because you're treating a necessary condition as if it were a sufficient condition. Are you guys all cool with that? Okay, let me give you another example that's a little, tries to kind of rub against our intuitions, right? Okay, so if we don't get the software update, okay, at our company, then we're not going to finish the project on time. But I have good news for you. We're getting the update right now. Okay, what does that imply?
Nothing.
We'll finish the project on time.
Okay, so if you said nothing, you're absolutely right. If you felt like, oh wait, okay, that's good news, we're getting the update, therefore we're going to finish the project on time, you're actually making that mistake of confusing sufficient for necessary. And the reason why is, let's go back to the original claim. The original claim was if we don't get the update, then we won't finish the project on time. Just stop and think about it for a second. What is necessary? What am I saying is necessary to finish the project? Getting the update.
You need the update.
Yeah. So if I say, hey, if you don't get the update, then you're not going to finish the project, what I'm really saying is it's necessary that I get the update if I want to finish the project. If I finish the project, then I must have gotten the update, right? That's another way of thinking about it. But then I wrongly concluded, oh, I got the update, therefore I'll finish on time. You've treated what is in fact necessary, getting the update, as if it were sufficient. You're like, oh, we got the update, so we're good to go. No, there may be a whole list of other things that you also need. If we don't get the update, then we won't finish the project on time. If we don't hear back from the lead contractor, then we won't finish the project on time. Like, the list of necessary things could go on forever. So whenever you see an if-then statement, or it doesn't even have to be an if-then statement, whenever you see a claim, ask yourself, is this telling me that something is necessary for something else? And then if it is, that's the necessary condition, and the other condition is the sufficient condition. And then sometimes, the LSAT mistakenly concludes that the necessary condition, if it's satisfied, is good enough to complete the project, and now it's just erroneously turned that necessary condition into a sufficient condition, and we can't do that. Let's talk about confusing correlation for causation. I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, but a lot of times when people see an if-then statement, they actually think that a causal claim is being made, right? They think that I'm saying that the poison caused the sickness, but really all I'm saying is, well, it guarantees that you'll get sick, but I don't know why. When it comes to correlation and causation, a correlative claim is simply a claim that states that two things happen together. Okay? So, for example, this is super common, but people who smoke tend to get lung cancer. Now notice the verb in that sentence is get. I said tend to get, but we can actually ignore that. People get kind of distracted by the words tend to. Just focus on the word get. People who smoke get lung cancer. More accurately, they tend to get lung cancer. But the point is they get it. But the word get just says that these things are happening together. That if you have this characteristic, if you smoke, then you tend to get lung cancer. But I'm not making a claim about what caused that, right? So if the LSAT said people who smoke tend to get lung cancer, therefore you should avoid smoking to avoid lung cancer, or therefore smoking causes lung cancer, they've jumped from a correlation to a causal claim, a correlative claim to a causal claim, and that's a problem. It's not that things that are correlated don't necessarily have a causal relationship. They certainly do in a lot of cases. The problem is that we just don't know for sure. I know it might sound bizarre, but it's very possible that people who smoke do so to relieve their anxiety, and their anxiety is actually what leads to lung cancer. Sounds crazy, but it's a possibility, right? It's possible that you're an anxious person. Being anxious makes you want to smoke. Being anxious also makes you more likely to get lung cancer. So people who smoke tend to get lung cancer, but it's not because the smoking is causing the lung cancer, it's because the anxiety is causing both, and those two things just happen together. They happen to be correlated, but there's no causal relationship between them. The point here is that when the LSAT draws a causal conclusion, you want to look back and see if the evidence was merely correlative. If it's merely telling you whether two things happen together, and that's it, then we got a problem. Sometimes though, the conclusion is causal, and if I look back at the evidence, I'm like, oh, but the evidence is causal too, so there's not a flaw there at least. There might be some other flaw, but there's not a correlation to causation flaw. Okay? Now, the best way to decide, in my mind, it's not the only way, and unfortunately it doesn't cover all circumstances, but in general, the best way to decide whether a sentence is causal or correlative is to look at the verb. Okay? So if I said to you, smokers tend to get is the verb, that's correlative. But if I said smoking causes, that's obviously causal. But I could also say something like smoking promotes lung cancer, or smoking increases your chances of getting lung cancer. Increases is the verb there, and increases tells you that this thing is having an effect on something else, right? Or if I say decreases, if If I said smoking decreases your chances of getting lung cancer, then it is in fact having an effect on my lung cancer, right? So that's a causal claim rather than merely a correlative claim. Oh, would the word because turn it causal? Yes. So the word because is often used to introduce evidence or premises, right, on the test. So it's not like every time you see the word because, all of a sudden you're looking at a causal claim. But in some cases, because is used in a different sense and it's creating a causal claim. So, for example, Sarah was fired because she was perpetually late. Right? What I'm saying there is that her tardiness caused her to be fired. So that's an example where the because is not being used as evidence. It's not like I'm trying to prove that she was fired. We all agree that she was fired. I'm trying to explain why she was fired, and so then it becomes a causal claim. Your number one job is to first understand what you're reading. Okay, so I know we just talked about a lot of things, and that can actually be a detriment. I mean, I want you to understand it, but at the same time, sometimes you're so fixated on those terms that you're not paying attention to what you're reading. So this is going to sound weird, but literally forget everything I just told you and focus first and foremost on reading and understanding the argument and deciding for yourself whether you think it's good or bad. Then, as you start to unpack it, you might start to see these things, but don't worry about them while you're reading the argument. Just try to understand what that author is saying and whether you think they're a nimwit or they actually have a good point.